blood on his tailored suit, a multi-million-dollar empire at his feet, and a line of Michelin-starred chefs weeping at the door. Dominic Gallo feared no man. Yet he found himself locking his kitchen doors, begging the plump, unassuming woman, holding a mop to stay and share a meal. The dining room of the Gallo estate, perched ominously over the fog-drenched hills of Pacific Heights, was a testament to cold, hard power. The walls were lined with imported mahogany, the chandelier was Austrian crystal, and the man sitting at the head of the long, empty table was currently radiating a murderous aura. Dominic Gallo, the undisputed head of the West Coast Syndicate, stared down at the plate before him. It was a culinary masterpiece, pan-seared Wagyu beef, resting on a bed of truffle-infused puree, garnished with edible gold leaf and a micro-herb salad. It had been prepared by Chef Armand Delacroix, a man poached directly from a 3-Michelin-star restaurant in Paris. Dominic picked up his silver fork, took a single bite, and chewed in absolute silence. The 5 men standing guard around the perimeter of the room held their breath. Matteo Dominic's right-hand man subtly shifted his weight, anticipating the explosion. It didn't take long. Dominic spat the beef into a linen napkin with a look of profound disgust. He stood up slowly, the scrape of his heavy wooden chair echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous room. Armand. Dominic said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the chest. The chef, a tall, reedy man, trembling in his pristine white coat, stepped forward from the kitchen doors. Yes, mister. Gallo is the reduction not to your liking. I can adjust the acidity. It tastes. Dominic interrupted, walking slowly toward the terrified chef. Like an Excel spreadsheet, it tastes like ego and plastic. There is no warmth in this. There is no soul. Mr. Gallo, I assure you, those ingredients were flown in this morning from, I don't care if God himself carried them down from heaven. Dominic roared, sweeping his arm across the table. The crystal glasses, the fine china, and the Wagyu beef went flying, shattering violently against the marble floor. I am surrounded by vipers all day. I have the feds tapping my phones, the Colombians pushing my borders, and a traitor bleeding my accounts. When I sit down in my own home, I want to eat something that makes me feel like a human being, not a damn bank account. Dominic pointed a heavy ringed finger at the door. Get out. Pack your knives and get out before I have Matteo test his new suppressor on your kneecaps. And tell the agency, if they send me another pompous artist, instead of someone who can actually cook, I'll burn their offices to the ground. Armand didn't need to be told twice. He fled, slipping slightly on his own truffle puree, and vanished into the night. Dominic sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. That was the 4th chef in 3 weeks. Hours later, the mansion settled into an eerie, oppressive silence. The guards patrolled the perimeter, and Dominic was locked in his study, drowning his exhaustion in a glass of aged scotch and poring over encrypted ledgers. Downstairs, slipping through the servants' entrance like a ghost, came Margot Fisher. Margot was 28, carrying an extra 40 pounds that softened her features into a Renaissance painting roundness and deeply, profoundly exhausted. She worked the graveyard shift for Caldwell Cleaning Services, a high-end agency that catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy of San Francisco. Margot didn't know the specifics of what Mr. Gallo did for a living, but she wasn't an idiot. You didn't find bullet casings kicked under the Persian rugs of legitimate businessmen. But Margot kept her head down. She had to. Her younger brother Toby had made a catastrophic error in judgment 6 months ago, racking up a $50,000 debt at an underground casino. A casino run by very bad men who had promised to start sending Toby home in pieces if they didn't get their weekly installments. So Margot scrubbed blood stains off marble-polished Austrian crystal and pretended she was invisible. She pushed her cleaning cart into the grand kitchen and stopped sighing heavily. The place was a disaster zone. Pots and pans were piled high, sauce was splattered across the stainless steel prep stations, and a perfectly good side of beef was rotting on the counter. Margot tied her hair back, snapped on a pair of yellow rubber gloves, and got to work. For 2 hours, the only sound in the kitchen was the rhythmic scrubbing of a sponge and the soft hum of the industrial refrigerator. By 2 a.m., the kitchen was sparkling. But Margot's stomach gave a violent, embarrassing rumble. She hadn't eaten since noon. Her entire paycheck was going to Toby's debt tomorrow. She hadn't even been able to afford groceries for herself. She looked at the massive walk-in pantry. Usually stealing from a client was grounds for immediate termination, or in Gallo's case, maybe worse. But she spotted a small crate of rejected produce sitting near the garbage disposal. Overripe Roma tomatoes, a few bruised cloves of garlic, a bunch of wilting basil, and a cheap, tough cut of chuck roast that Armand had likely ordered for the guard dogs. Margot reasoned that taking garbage wasn't stealing. She washed her hands, grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet, and went to work. She wasn't a trained chef. She didn't know what a sous vide machine was. But she knew how her grandmother used to cook in their cramped apartment in Brooklyn. She diced the fat from the tough beef, rendering it down in the pan until it hissed and popped. She tossed in the chopped garlic, letting the pungent, sharp aroma bloom in the hot oil. She roughly chopped the overripe tomatoes, heavy with natural sugars, and threw them in, letting them blister and break down into a rustic, chunky sauce. She added a splash of cheap red cooking wine she found under the sink, tossing the diced beef back in to braise. Finally, she threw in the torn basil leaves, a heavy pinch of coarse salt, and cracked black pepper. She set some rigatoni to boil the steam rising around her flushed, tired face. As she stirred the simmering pot, the rich, savory smell of a true, slow-cooked ragout filled the cavernous, cold kitchen. It smelled like Sunday afternoons. It smelled like safety. Margot plated a generous portion in a simple white bowl, sat down on a small stool in the corner of the kitchen, and closed her eyes as she took her first bite. It was perfect. The acidity of the tomatoes cut through the rich beef fat. The pasta was perfectly al dente. She let out a soft groan of relief, momentarily forgetting the sprawling mafia estate, her brother's debt, and her aching back. She was so lost in the comfort of the food that she didn't hear the heavy oak doors of the kitchen slide open. Dominic had not slept. The numbers in the ledger weren't adding up. 2 shipments had vanished from the docks, and the Irish syndicate was getting bold. His stomach was a tight knot of acid and stress. He had wandered out of his study to pour himself another scotch when it hit him. It wasn't the smell of truffles. It wasn't the metallic tang of caviar. It was the heavy, intoxicating aroma of roasted garlic, caramelized tomatoes, and braised beef. It was a smell that punched Dominic straight in the chest, violently dragging him 30 years into the past, back to a cramped kitchen in Palermo, before his father had brought them to America. Before the wars. Before the blood. Like a man possessed. Dominic followed the scent down the grand staircase, his bare feet silent on the cold marble. He pushed open the kitchen doors, expecting to find that Armand had crawled back to beg for his job. Instead, he saw her. She was sitting on a step stool in the corner, wearing a baggy, faded blue cleaning uniform. Her hair was falling out of a messy bun, and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek. She was chubby, soft-looking, completely out of place in his fortress of sharp edges and cold glass. She had a bowl cradled in her lap, eating with a look of pure, unadulterated bliss on her face. "Who the hell are you?" Dominic's voice cracked like a whip in the silent kitchen. Margot jumped so violently she nearly dropped the bowl. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with sheer terror. She recognized him instantly from the news from the hushed whispers of the other cleaning staff. Dominic Gallo, the Reaper of the Bay. I'm sorry," Margot stammered, backing up against the industrial oven, instinctively shielding the bowl of pasta. "I'm the cleaner, Margot, from Caldwell Services. I was just the ingredients were in the trash pile, Mr. Gallo. I swear I didn't steal anything from the pantry. I'm sorry, I'll leave right now. I'll pay for the tomatoes." Dominic ignored her frantic babbling. His dark eyes were locked entirely on the bowl in her hands. The steam rising from it carried that impossible nostalgic scent directly to his brain. His mouth watered so intensely it actually ached. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Margot squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the backhand, waiting for the violence she knew men like him were capable of. Instead, a large, heavily scarred hand gently took the fork from her trembling fingers. Margot opened her eyes to see the towering Mafia Boss staring down at her makeshift meal. Without breaking eye contact with her, Dominic scooped up a piece of the braised beef and pasta, bringing it to his mouth. He chewed. Margot watched as the terrifying, hardened criminal froze. The harsh lines of his face, the deep furrow between his brows, the tight clench of his jaw seemed to melt away. For a brief, terrifying second, Margot thought he was going to cry. The beef was so tender, it fell apart on his tongue. The sauce was bright rich and completely devoid of pretense. It tasted exactly like his grandmother's kitchen. It tasted like love. Dominic swallowed the silence, stretching out between them thick and heavy. "You made this," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Margot whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Just an old family recipe. I was hungry." Dominic looked at the large pot still sitting on the stove. He then looked down at Margot. He noted her exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes, the cheap, worn-out sneakers on her feet. He realized something profound in that moment. This woman, a lowly cleaner, had more warmth in her fingertips than a dozen trained culinary masters. Dominic walked over to the grand double doors of the kitchen. With a loud clack, he threw the heavy brass deadbolts, locking them from the inside. Margot's breath hitched. "Mr. Gallo." Dominic turned around. The predator was gone. In his place was just a deeply tired, incredibly hungry man. "Get another bowl," Dominic commanded, his voice softer than before, yet leaving no room for argument. "Sir, get another bowl, Margot, and a spoon." Dominic pulled up a heavy wooden chair to the central prep island and sat down, looking up at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I haven't had a real meal in 6 months. I throw out chefs because they feed my ego, not my soul. I'm asking you." He paused, swallowing his immense pride. "I'm begging you. Sit down. Share this with me." Margot was paralyzed. You didn't say no to Dominic Gallo, but you also didn't sit down and eat leftovers with him. I have to finish polishing the foyer," she lied weakly, gesturing toward her cart. "The foyer can wait," Dominic said, leaning forward. "Please." The vulnerability in the eyes of a known killer was more jarring than a gun to the head. Slowly, cautiously, Margot moved to the cupboards. She grabbed a deep ceramic bowl, ladled a massive portion of the steaming ragout into it, and set it in front of him. She grabbed her own bowl and perched tentatively on a stool across the island from him. For 20 minutes, they ate in silence. The only sound was the clinking of silverware against porcelain. Dominic ate like a starving wolf, inhaling the food with a desperate kind of reverence. He finished his bowl, went back to the stove, and served himself seconds without asking. When he finally pushed his empty bowl away, he let out a long, shuddering breath. My grandmother used to make it just like this. Except she used veal. Veal is too lean, Margot said before she could stop herself. Chuck roast has better marbling for a slow braise. The fat melts into the tomatoes. Dominic stared at her, a slow, genuine smirk creeping onto his face. It transformed him, making him ruggedly handsome in the dim kitchen lighting. You correcting me in my own house, Margot. I'm just talking about the meat, sir. Dominic. Call me Dominic. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his broad chest. You're not a chef. You clean houses at 3 a.m. Why? Margot looked down at her hands, the rubber gloves sitting abandoned on the counter. Because cleaning houses at 3 a.m. pays a premium, and I need the premium. Debt. Dominic guessed his eyes sharpening. He knew the signs of desperation. He practically traded in it. Margot hesitated. If she told him the truth, she might anger him. If she lied, a man like him would undoubtedly find out. My brother, Toby, he made some bad bets. I'm just trying to keep his kneecaps attached to his legs. Who holds the paper? Dominic asked, casually, pulling a silver cigar case from his pocket and laying it on the counter. A man named O'Reilly, Margot whispered, shuddering at the name. The air in the kitchen instantly turned frigid. Dominic's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating darkness. The O'Reilly syndicate. The very men stealing from his docks. The men bleeding his empire. O'Reilly, Dominic mused, tapping his fingers against the granite countertop. He looked at Margot, soft, tired, fiercely loyal to her idiot brother and capable of creating heaven in a bowl. A brilliant, twisted plan began to form in the Mafia Boss's mind. Margot, Dominic said softly, leaning across the island until he was inches from her face. How much does Toby owe? 50,000, she choked out, ashamed. I have $500 towards it. I'm dropping it off tomorrow at their front. No, you're not, Dominic stated. Margot panicked. Mr. Gallo. Dominic, please. If I don't pay them, they'll kill him. They won't touch him, Dominic said, his voice a low, soothing purr that made a shiver race down Margot's spine. Because, starting tomorrow, you don't work for Caldwell Services anymore. You work for me. Exclusively. Margot blinked, her mind spinning. As a cleaner. As my private chef, Dominic corrected. You will live in this house. You will cook for me and only me. And in exchange, I will wipe your brother's debt clean by tomorrow night. Margot stared at him, breath caught in her throat. $50,000. Erased. Just for cooking, it sounded like salvation. But as she looked into Dominic Gallo's dark, fathomless eyes, she realized that making a deal with the devil always came with a catch. She just didn't know yet that her rustic ragout was about to become the centerpiece of the bloodiest mafia war San Francisco had ever seen, and that Dominic didn't just want her cooking. He wanted to own the woman who made him feel alive again. Margot's life transformed overnight, shifting from a desperate hustle to a surreal, velvet-lined captivity. The cramped, drafty apartment she shared with Toby in the slums of Oakland was replaced by a sprawling suite in the east wing of the Gallo estate. Her faded bleach-stained scrubs were traded for custom-tailored linen aprons and imported silk blouses. But the gilded cage, no matter how soft the cushions remained, a cage. Dominic had kept his word with terrifying efficiency. Within 24 hours of her serving him that rustic, life-altering ragout, a bruised and deeply terrified Toby was delivered to a secure safe house in Nevada. His $50,000 debt was entirely erased, But Dominic didn't just quietly pay off Finn O'Reilly, the volatile Irish boss who held the paper. Dominic sent the 50,000 in the form of blood-soaked counterfeit bills packed inside a wooden crate, a blatant theatrical insult meant to provoke the Irish syndicate into making a reckless move. For 3 agonizing weeks, the tension within the Pacific Heights mansion was absolutely suffocating. Outside the heavy iron gates, a brutal war was brewing in the foggy streets of San Francisco. Warehouses burned in the dead of night. Shipments of contraband were violently hijacked along the docks. But inside the mansion's grand kitchen, it was a bizarre, insulated sanctuary of flour dust, simmering garlic, and a quiet, building intimacy that terrified Margot more than the gunfire. Dominic spent his evenings sitting at the central marble island, shedding his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves, simply watching Margot cook. He didn't just crave her food, he was utterly consumed by her presence. Her soft, lush curves, her quiet, off-key, humming as she worked the endearing way she absent-mindedly wiped her hands on her apron, it grounded him. In a treacherous world built entirely on plastic loyalty deceit and constant paranoia, Margot was the only authentic breathing entity in his life. "You're chopping those onions far too aggressively," Dominic murmured one evening, swirling a glass of expensive Barolo wine in his hand, the red liquid catching the dim pendant lighting. Margot paused, her knife glaring at him over her shoulder, her hands resting on her wide hips. "If you know so much about knife work, Mr. Gallo, you come do it. Or are you too busy running an empire of thugs and staring at my back?" It was a dangerously insolent way to speak to a mob boss who had executed men for far less. But Margot had quickly learned that Dominic craved her defiance. It was real. He smirked, the harsh lines of his face softening as he set his crystal glass down. He stood up and stepped behind her, moving so quietly for a man of his immense size. He stood so close, his broad chest brushed against her back. He reached his thick, heavily scarred arms around her, his massive hands covering her smaller ones on the handle of the chef's knife. "Guide the blade, Margot," he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly vibration against her ear. "Don't force it. Let the weight of the steel do the work. It's like anything else in life. Apply the right pressure, and things fall apart exactly how you want them to." Margot shivered violently, her pulse hammering relentlessly against her throat. The intoxicating smell of his bespoke sandalwood cologne mixed perfectly with the sharp acidic scent of the chopped onions. She was falling for the devil piece by piece, and she was entirely powerless to stop it. But their fragile sanctuary was about to be violently breached. Carmine, Dominic's oldest and most ruthless capo, watched this domestic display from the heavy shadows of the hallway corridor. Disgust and pure, unadulterated contempt twisted Carmine's weathered features. He had served the Gallo family for 30 years. He believed Dominic was growing soft, fatally distracted by a chubby, low-class cleaning woman, while the O'Reillys brazenly chipped away at their hard-earned territory. Carmine decided he needed to act to preserve the empire. He made an encrypted, untraceable call to Finn O'Reilly. The Irishman didn't need to mount a frontal assault on the fortress. He just needed to poison the king's plate. Carmine provided the schedule, the supplier routes, and the exact ingredients of the meals Margot was preparing. Finn O'Reilly provided the weapon. It was a silent, invisible threat designed to bypass the armed guards and the security cameras. The trap was set, and Margot, entirely oblivious to the brutal mechanics of the underworld, was about to become the instrument of Dominic's demise. The delivery arrived the Tuesday. It was a wooden crate of imported black truffles, requested specifically for a risotto Dominic loved. The crate arrived from Golden Gate Produce distributors. Margot carefully unboxed the fungi on the stainless steel prep station, smelling their earthy aroma. She reached for her paring knife, But as she picked up the largest truffle, she paused. Her grandmother taught her to trust her nose above her eyes. Beneath the mushroom's musk lingered a faint, unnatural metallic tang. It smelled of sulfur, mixed with the bitter aroma of crushed apple seeds. It smelled exactly like cyanide. "Carmine," Margot called to the veteran capo at the door. "Who delivered these truffles today?" Carmine avoided her eyes. "The usual supplier, just cook. The boss is hungry." Margot's instinct screamed at her. She sliced a tiny sliver off the edge and placed it on a small saucer. She called Brutus Dominic's mastiff. "Hey, don't feed the dog human food," Carmine snapped, stepping forward, touching his hip holster. Brutus merely sniffed it, whined, and backed away. Margot's blood ran cold. The realization hit her like a blow. These are tainted. There is cyanide laced into the truffles. Before Carmine could draw his concealed weapon to silence her forever, the heavy kitchen doors swung open. Dominic strode in, shedding a dripping trench coat, his sharp eyes instantly locking onto the tension suffocating the room. "What is the problem here?" Dominic demanded, his voice deceptively calm. Margot locked eyes with Dominic, her hands trembling violently. "Dominic, the truffles, they are poisoned. Someone tampered with the delivery." Dominic froze. The silence in the kitchen became absolute. He slowly turned his head to look at Carmine. The capo's hand was hovering inches from his shoulder holster. In the unforgiving world of the mafia, hesitation was a loud confession. "Carmine," Dominic said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "Walk over to that cutting board. Eat a piece of that truffle." Carmine swallowed hard, cold sweat rolling down his forehead. "Boss, come on. The maid is crazy. She doesn't know what she's talking about." "Eat a truffle." Dominic drew his customized Colt pistol in a blinding flash, aiming it directly at Carmine's chest. With a desperate yell, Carmine drew his own weapon, deciding to take his final chances. But Dominic was infinitely faster. 2 deafening shots rang out, echoing against the tiled walls. Carmine collapsed backward, crashing into the prep station, and sliding to the floor dead before he realized he had been hit. Margot screamed, dropping to her knees and covering her ears, but the gunshots were a clear signal to the men waiting outside. Instantly, the kitchen windows shattered inward as automatic gunfire erupted from the gardens. Finn O'Reilly had positioned a heavily armed hit squad outside. "Get down!" Dominic roared, diving across the central island and violently tackling Margot to the floor as a hail of bullets shredded the custom oak cabinetry and pulverized the expensive granite countertops into dust. He shielded her body with his massive frame. "Stay completely flat behind the stove," he commanded, popping up from cover just long enough to return precise, deadly fire through the shattered window frames. The pristine culinary sanctuary became a horrific war zone. Bags of flour exploded like white smoke bombs clouding the air. Heavy copper pots clattered violently to the ground as bullets ripped mercilessly through the stainless steel appliances. Margot scrambled frantically behind the massive reinforced industrial oven, blind terror choking her throat. 2 masked Irish hitmen breached the servants' entrance, their boots crunching loudly on broken glass. Dominic dropped the first one instantly, with a flawless shot to the throat, but his gun gave a hollow click. Empty magazine. The second hitman raised his automatic rifle, aiming squarely at the center of Dominic's chest, a cruel smile visible beneath his dark mask. Margot did not think. Instinct born from years of fiercely protecting her helpless younger brother in the slums completely took over her rational mind. She grabbed the heaviest object within her immediate reach. She lifted her grandmother's massive cast-iron skillet, still slick with hot cooking oil from her prep work, and swung it upward with every single ounce of desperate strength she possessed. The heavy black iron connected with sickening force against the side of the hitman's skull. He crumpled to the floor instantly, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the ceiling, before he lost consciousness in a pool of blood. Dominic stood frozen amidst the smoke and destruction, staring down at the neutralized hitman, and then slowly looked up at the terrified, heavily panting woman holding a blood-splattered frying pan. Sirens began to wail loudly in the distance. Dominic's perimeter guards flooded the kitchen, securing the massive room, but Dominic ignored every single one of them. He holstered his empty gun, stepped carefully over the bodies, and gently took the heavy skillet from Margot's violently trembling hands, tossing it carelessly onto the ruined counter. He pulled her forcefully into his broad chest, burying his face in her flour-dusted hair. She was shaking uncontrollably, warm tears streaking rapidly through the dirt and soot on her face. "I have got you," he whispered, fiercely, his massive hands gripping her waist like a vice. "You are safe. I swear on my soul you are completely safe." Margot sobbed openly. "You are a monster." "I know," Dominic murmured. "But I am your monster. You saved my life. I am never letting you go." He kissed her, tasting bitter gun smoke and roasted garlic. It sealed a dark, unbreakable pact. By dawn, Finn O'Reilly was found dead. His syndicate collapsed. 1 year later, the kitchen was rebuilt. Dominic sat watching his wife Margot stir a bubbling pot of braised short ribs. She handed him a wooden spoon to taste the rich sauce. He smiled softly. It was the undeniable taste of an empire built on true loyalty, pure survival, and a perfectly cooked, incredibly delicious beef ragu. Wow, who knew a simple bowl of pasta could conquer the most ruthless mafia boss in the city? What did you think of Margot's cast-iron skillet takedown? Let me know your favorite moment in the comments below. If you loved this intense, twist-filled romance, make sure to hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling real-life drama stories every single week. See you in the next one.